You had blood here and you had blood there. You did something. You don't know what you did. You just kind of wrapped it up and forgot about it. And as long as you was able to walk.
How are you supplied?
Well, the supply truck tried to get to us. We had uh, both for supply for food and for fuel. That was the big one. And
So somebody would come up from the back, so to speak,
oh
in
yeah,
your trail,
yeah,
and you guys would stop, and then they would resupply you.
yeah. And usually every day if the gas truck was with us, which was a truck just packed with GI gas cans, you know, and they could pile. I don't know how many was on that. There was just hundreds of them on there, and that was just to drive one of them trucks was a pretty dangerous mission because, boy, you want one tracer shell in that tank and it's gone, and they would come up by the vehicles wherever the vehicles were. They usually were kind of encircled and sort of. And how many cans do you need? They just throw off so many cans that the guys need to fill their vehicles, and that's how we supplied with gasoline.
What happened to the dead and the wounded?
Well, the medics were with us. They did what they could, and there was a lot of times they were just left because knowing somebody be coming up behind us, and there was people that took care of them.
So there was a whole. The people would come up from behind you. They'd be able to pick up the wounded or the dead, and then they'd bring them back.
They take them
Okay,
back, yeah.
all right, all right.
Hopefully, and without getting into trouble, you know.
Sure.
The after we crossed the Rhine River, uh, the general had a little powwow with everybody, and I never thought that was a wise move, but he did it anyway. And the whole unit, I don't know how many of there was there, but our whole unit was there. And for a group to get together in a congested area at a time like that wasn't good. We had aircraft support over us watching, and he gave us a pep talk about crossing the Rhine River.
Who was this? General.
Well, General Grohl
Grohl,
was
okay.
our
All right.
general there. Of course, was in Patton's army. Well, you heard him different times, but and he was a different guy, and the term blood and guts, I guess, was probably pretty accurate for him. And a while back, I read the history of the 6th Armored Division and some of the things that he did, and by the Army standards, he would have been court-martialed for what he did, but because he literally defied orders. And that's what happened at the Rhine River. We got down to the river, and then the Germans were the engineers had put a pontoon bridge across, and they were trying to come back at night and bomb that. And of course, they kept a smoke screen going, so that was just solid smoke in there. But they still try and drop bombs and hit it. And so we finally got across the river, and what the general had said at that meeting was, if you get across, go just as far as you can, as fast as you can. And a half track would ramble along pretty good speed. We had our half track. We had a two-wheel trailer behind us full of spare parts. We looked like there was a movie on it. He run a junkyard and he always had stuff hanging on his truck. And that's kind of what we looked like, because if we'd have a Jeep get blowed off the road, we'd stop and knock the wheels off, take the wheels off, just hang them on, because we needed them. But we got across the river and we started moving. And we went as far as we could until we hit an ambush, and we got in this little town, and a Jeep was going to go back and get mail, and and pick up some supplies. And he got just outside of town and they blew him off the road. Then we knew we had a problem. So we held that town for 5 days. The first word that came to us was when Franklin Roosevelt died. That was the date of that. But we held the town, and every night we'd walk. It was just another little hamlet again, and there was a lot of prisoners, and there was a lot of German soldiers in there. So every night we took prisoners. You know, they would try to move around at night, and we could nail them that way. So every morning there was usually a line of them that was lined up and interrogated. But ironic thing happened there. After 5 days, all of a sudden a tank column come moving in, and he was I don't know what his rank was, but he stood up on top of that, and I heard him holler, "Where's the commander of this outfit?" And so they went and got him, and he come out, and his first remark was, he says, "I was supposed to take this town." We got ahead of him by 5 days. So you see, we had a little competition going there, even amongst the officers. But I always laughed about that. I thought, well, that shows how childish some of them really were. He was mad because he didn't take the town, and we'd held it for 5 days. It wasn't an easy one because we lost some men there, and but we put out our outpost and we walked the streets. And as you'd walk, you'd hear a noise, and you know it's somebody moving. And of course, we never walked side by side. We always walked one just ahead of the other, and we'd walk through by these doorways. And I always was scared of the doorways, watch for the doorways. And then you get a little ways, and all of a sudden you'd hear that in back of you. You knew good well that somebody gotten around you again. So every night there was prisoners taken there.
The civilians were all going. Yeah, that's the group. Yeah.
At Baston.
Oh wow. Okay.
Is there a restroom right handy?
Oh
here?
yes, absolutely. Let me show.
This is difficult for a lot of them today, as it was for me. But the facilities that are available to them today.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, they don't spend days and weeks on transportation. It's just a matter of a couple hours, and they're where they've got to go. Then they can communicate back and forth between cell phones and all the stuff they got today. And we knew when we went there it was going to be weeks before we ever got a letter. You know, and that was the only communication we had, was just a letter.
Were you able to get mail on a regular basis, or sporadically, or?
Yeah, we got mail, and that's why the one guy that took care of that, he went back, and that's when he got blowed off the road. You know, he went back to get the mail from headquarters, and of course everything kept moving farther in the direction we was going. See,
was there any sense of winning or losing? Did you feel like we as a country we were winning this war?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, everybody I think had the same feeling, and we could see progress. There was days when it was disappointing. There was days when we got pushed back. You know, and there's some days we didn't make any progress at all. But
what were you up against mainly? Were there tanks that were attacking you? Were there just soldiers, or?
Mainly just we didn't have anything to combat the tanks with, especially the early part. Once in a while we had what they called a tank destroyer unit assigned to us, because we didn't have anything with a gun big enough to affect the tank. But and then later, in the closing days of the war, they assigned a couple light tanks to our unit. So then there was something else to work on. See, so that was, yeah. and we had to maintain them, make sure that they kept running. And
You described going from hamlet to hamlet, villages and towns and whatnot. This is covering several months, moving forward. You're going towards Germany, right?
we're going towards Germany.
Yeah.
We come from France up through Belgium, Luxembourg, and then on into Germany.
Did
Yeah.
you get into Baston?
I was at Baston.
You were at Baston.
Yeah. That was the main push, I think, for us to be there. And like I said, we both the 101st, and that was the guy that was with us on the last thing. I enjoyed chatting with him.
Yeah,
It
Bill
was-
Sefton.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
So you came in after Bill and his group had already secured the town.
Well, no, it was rough going in Baston.
Oh.
We tried to get into Baston a couple of times, got chased out. The thing was, again, they had the coordinates on the artillery, and so, and they usually, I always said if there was a church tower or steeple anywheres, usually that's the first thing that we'd pick off, because that's where they had a crow sitting up there spotting us, you know. And the one night we outside of Baston, we slept in the snowbank out there for days, and I slept in a shell hole. And one night the motor sergeant come and rattled a tarp on top of my hole there, and so I crawled out, and we had a tank or a armored car in Baston that had to be retrieved, and so and I never turned down an offer to go. I always did what I had to do, and so I learned there. That was the first time I ever knew that they had a full set of skid chains for an Army half-track. I never knew there was such a thing. And of course, not going to the Army school, I missed a lot of things, but we got them half tracks on. Imagine, here it is winter, it's snowing, cats and dogs, and putting a set of skid chains on there, and then headed in towards Baston. And we located where the armored car was. And most of the equipment there had a cable on one end or the other, already attached. And so I told the driver, back that thing down there, and I'll hook on to that armored car. And just got that hooked on when the shells started coming in. And I said, get out of here. And so he gave her the gas, and he got that vehicle moving, but it was an old cobblestone street, and there was a streak of fire underneath both of those half-track treads on those cobblestones. I can still see that fire. But we got the thing out of there. But those are the things, I guess, you say, well, it was another thing that had to be done.
So eventually you did get into Baston?
Oh yeah, yeah. We eventually got in there, yeah. But then things began to quiet down somewhat. Then, but we had to run patrols lots of times. Our unit had a presidential citation for the Prune River, I think it was. We held out that area for quite a time, and we had outposts up there, and we had to service them from time to time. And so one night, we moved at night as much as anything. One night we went up to take some supplies up to them, and we had what we called a weasel. It was a track vehicle, and it was kind of a cute little thing to have around, but it would go right over the snow, kind of like a good big snow machine, and it would just go. And so there was a couple of us jumped in that, and we started up the direction we had to go. And what was left of the little town, it was going through there, and there was a tank column coming up through the town. And just as
Our side or yours, or their side?
our side,
Oh, okay.
our side, and just as they was coming through there, of course, there was animals around and people lived in the town, and a pig ran across the road and he got caught running into one of those tanks. And one of the guys on our truck, we always called him Pappy, because he was the oldest one of the bunch, and he jumped off and he says, "Pick me up on the way back." And so we went on up to do what we had to do, and on the way back we come back. He stood with a ham skinned out. He skinned a ham out of that pig, and we had to fend for ourselves an awful lot there. We'd grab a chicken here and a rabbit there, and our half-track driver was a kid from Cairo, Kentucky, and he had a hair lip, so he talked kind of funny, but he didn't mind cooking. He kind of liked to cook, so we had some big old pots, and that's why we looked like a caravan, you know, sometimes on the road, but we kind of did our thing, what we had to do to stay alive.
You mentioned earlier that you'd seen Patton. In what way did you see him?
I seen him standing, and now this is a little ironic, but it's still one of those things. He was a guy with a silver guns, you know, and he stood on the edge of a little town, and our unit was just moving through there. And there he stood with a big blonde German gal. That was my thought of Patton. But in going back and reading through the history of it, things that he did, and this idea of going as far as you can, as fast as you can. And he ran us out of fuel, you see, more than once. And by doing that, you know, there was times our fuel was down, and we had a little reserve in a trailer. And a lot of times we'd have to pull that out in order to keep going. Otherwise, we'd been just dead in the water.
Now, once you got through into Germany, did things start to wind down?
Yeah.
The activity were you capturing more and more prisoners?
I've seen prisoners come back by the roll, you know, just a whole roll.
Rows of them just walking.
They would walk. It was comical, and German prisoners, they'd come back with their hands over their head. A lot of times you see them in a movie, and they keep right on going.
So they were not even being led by soldiers,
oh,
by
no,
Americans? They're just walking out?
Just on their own. They're on their own. They just started going, and they just go to the back. They know they get back and they'd
Far
be
enough,
incarcerated,
yeah.
and it was all done.
Did you notice any age differences in the soldiers? Because I've heard from guys who said they saw old men, they saw young boys, the Germans.
Yeah. Both ends
Mhm.
of the spectrum. And matter of fact, at the very tail end, I remember one time nobody wanted to take prisoners, you know. So if they kept on going, but if you took prisoners and had to guard them overnight, then nobody wanted to do that. And that's when accidents happened, you know, when the guard would say, well, he tried to run, so I shot him. So nobody wanted to hold a prisoner. And what we did with ours, a lot of times we put them on the fuel truck. Let them climb up on top of the fuel truck, sit up there, and they didn't like that at all, because they knew good and well that if somebody shot a shell into that fuel truck, that was all over, you know. But one time there was just a couple kids, and I could see that they was kids, and I got so I could talk a little German, and a lot of the kids could talk some English because they had it in school. And I told the kids, just you know, matter of fact, I climbed up on the back of the truck, and said to them, I said, just all you gotta do is just behave yourself, and you'll be all right. And I asked them how old they was, and they were just kids out of school. And I said, well, what are you doing in the Army? They give them a gun and said, here, you get in there. So there was some young kids in there, and I don't know what the youngest was, but they were just teenagers. Yeah. But they had guns. Towards the last, it got so they'd take a stock and rough it out, a wooden stock, just enough to hold the barrel of the gun, and slam it within it. They wasn't finished at all. They were just roughed out. They were doing everything they could to try and get supplies.
So at one point in all of this, did you hear that the war was, or at least the European war was over with?
Yeah.
VE Day?
Yeah. It finally happened, and that was a good day.
How did you hear about it?
I guess it came through on the radio, probably from the headquarters. Got it, and then it didn't take long for that news to get through the troops.
What was the reaction?
Well, a lot of them were ready to go home right there. Yeah, let's go
Well,
home.
was there? I've heard everything from guys who just sort of said, "Okay, finally it's over with," to people shooting guns off in the air and jumping up and down and.
Well, they did that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
they did that. Yeah, they did that. They celebrated a little bit, but
What was your reaction?
well, I just thank God that it ended.
Yeah. Once that was over with, was there any talk about where you'd be going after that? I mean, were you just going to go home? Because the Pacific was still going on.
Yeah, yeah, and this all happened in May, and then the 6th Armored Division was deactivated in July, I think, and we stayed at the little town when it first happened. We stayed until the Russians came through and took over that town.
What was your first impression of the Russians?
Well, it wasn't very good. It wasn't very good. One thing that I do remember, and I don't know how they had this, but they had a truck, which was a Model A Ford truck. I'd worked on cars all my life, and I was shocked when I seen that. But in this little town where we were billeted then, and of course, when the war's over, then everything goes back into garrison sort of. Yeah. Now it's the old routine again. Calisthenics in the morning. We were in an area bordered by a river, and had all our tents in there, and we stayed there until the Russians came through. And when the Russian unit came in, I don't know why a man made a statement or something. It was a German civilian that was standing there. So that Russian officer took the butt of his gun and smacked him right across the face. And it didn't leave a good impression. It didn't. No.
How were they dressed? I mean, did they look like they were, in crisp uniforms, or were they haphazardly, like, stuff put together? Or?
They had anything they could get to wrap around them. Their equipment looked the same way. That's why they had this old truck, I think. Of course, towards the last, the Germans were getting pretty desperate, and they even had some of their meal equipment was drawn with horses. Yeah.
There's an experience that you had mentioned to a while back, and I'm not quite sure how you came upon it, but at one point in time you got a chance to actually see one of the camps. How did that happen?
Well, our unit was part of the group that liberated Buchenwald, and we didn't have privy to a lot of the information and the what was going to be planned. We had a definite corners we had to be on. We were on that corner, and so our unit began to move in this direction that we ordered to, and we sat outside of Buchenwald prison camp there for a couple days, just parked, and we'd move and then stop, and what was happening, the Germans kept getting out of there, that the military did, and But as they finally got that surrounded, and then everybody moved in at the same time. And that was Buchenwald Prison Camp.
How did you come upon it? I mean, did you come upon it when it was already still there were still people there, or was it empty, or?
Oh, it was very much occupied, yeah. With the big gate swung open on that, I was on the back the half track again, and people rolled out of that. You know, it was almost scary. Something like you'd see in a science fiction film or something. You know, you'd look at a person and say, "Is that a person? Is that a live person?" Kind of walking death. And then we got through later we come back and went through the camp, and that's where I got some pictures of that. And interesting enough, last night they had one on a prison camp.
Yeah, I saw
and,
that. Yeah, I watched it. Yeah.
Kind of reminded me a little bit of what went on there. I'd never seen that before.
You know, I don't want to cause you any pain, but I think it's really important for the record that we try and get your reaction to what you saw. Were you prepared at all? Did somebody say to you, "You're going to go into this camp and this is what you're going to see," or was it a complete surprise to you?
It was a complete surprise. I'm sure somebody knew it was a concentration camp, but we'd taken, you know, a lot of times we had to just secure a hill, or maybe it was a town, and so you just went and did that, whatever you had to do to get there. And so I had no clue that this was a concentration camp. And you know, as I think of it now, that big tower, that big chimney sticking up there, should have been a clue, but frankly, I wasn't quite sure where we were. We were just near Weimar, Germany. That's where the concentration camp was. But once we got in there, and then we walked through the buildings, you know, and see what people lived in and how they lived. And then in one area, they couldn't dispose of them fast enough, so they were piled up. And I think some of my pictures, my snapshots that I did get, I think some of them have been lost. I'm not sure, but I know there was one at one time that had it was just showed them, they were up on a wagon, just piled up like cordwood, you know, human bodies, and most of them no clothes on. They'd strip them, and right in the prison camp itself, where the furnaces were, there was a place where there was literally hooks on the wall, like you'd hang beef, and they'd grab people, and this is what the people that we talked to in there said. They'd take them and hook them right on that, and that's where they'd first take their teeth out to add any gold. They'd save all the gold and strip their clothes off, and then from there they went into the furnace. And I had one picture of the furnace when we first got there. It wasn't cleaned out. It was just like they'd left it. And I think the picture that I have left it was a later picture, but it's hard to believe. Human nature is a funny thing, that people can be that cruel. And that's what I was reminded again last night. What can we do to get rid of these people? It just blows your mind to think that we, so-called human beings, can treat another human being in that fashion. I still can't fathom.
When you went into, what was your purpose in going into the camps? Were you there to try to help the remaining survivors, or were you there to What were you supposed to be doing?
Well, mainly to liberate it from the Germans, and that kind of took care of itself because when we started moving, get about so close, they started getting out of there. So when we moved into the camp proper, there was no German soldiers within the camp, but the prisoners were still there. The people were still there. We had one guy that could talk. I think it was a Russian or Polish guy that was in there, and one of our guys asked him about food, and food, and he says, "I don't need food. I need medicine." He had enough mind yet to know that he needed something more than food, and I don't know how long it's been since he'd eaten, but it's hard to believe that you can see a person with nothing but skin over their bones, and yet they're moving.
How long were you there the first time?
Oh, we was in that area a couple days there, if I remember right.
So what were you supposed to be doing? I mean, once you liberated the camp, you know it's secure.
Well, nothing much. We didn't have much to do there. That's when once the camp was liberated, then the help people sort of took over.
Okay.
The humanitarian aid was brought in there. But prior to that, you see, before the liberation of it, nobody knew what was going on inside them walls. And they lived in, well, they treated them just like you would animals, only less humane, I think, than animals, because they lived in these big sort of boxes and there was some straw in there, and they'd get so many people in there, and then there'd be another one on top of it, and there'd just be rows of these in this long building. And the people that were there said nobody wanted to go to the infirmary because they never came back, see. And that was a place where they went, and I can see that bench there yet. It was just sort of a plank across there, and in the back of them was what looked like a door, and it was, but they would sit down there, and they'd give them a shot, and of course that was their last shot, and then they just give them a shove, and that door would swing out, and it was hinged at the top, and they just dropped down into a pit, and then they'd pull them out of there and did whatever they did.
Was there any contact with the German civilian population around there? Did you see any of those people?
There was, yeah, they were people that moved in. Of course, it's hard to believe that these things happened right in a village or a place that's occupied. And of course, when the German soldiers are there, I think they pretty well kept everybody out. And then you had your high fences around, which barricaded people from getting in there. But I got along with the German people quite well on an individual basis. And matter of fact, I used to go to their house and drink coffee with them. And I felt sorry for them.
Were you able to, like for example, when you went to have coffee with them, were you able to speak English with them?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I tell you how I did it. I tell you how I always carried the New Testament in my pocket. And a lot of times we'd get to talking, and I say, Sie haben the Bible? Do you have a Bible? Oh, yeah. And I'd use that Bible, and I'd use words in there to communicate with them. And that's how I worked it. And it was funny because they would be kind of shocked, to think that I would do something like that, I guess. But I got along with the German people for the most part very well. And I made friends with some. I had, well, you got to stop and think about, you leave a family, and wherever I went, I always drew my cigarette rations and swapped it for chocolate and candy. and that I kept in my gas mask. And wherever went, and even during combat, in towns where we were in combat situation, if there were kids around, I usually could get their attention.
And they got the candy.
They got it. They were my friends.
Yeah.
And one little town, this was after combat, and we were there, and I used to walk down to there I was back in the motor pool again. I never got out of that. I walked to the motor pool every morning and walked down there, and I went by the mess hall, that was in a building, and the garbage cans were all out here in the street. And my first run into those kids was, they was digging in that garbage, you know, and a lot of the kids carried a bag, could be a sort of a leather type thing, and then they'd reach in there and they'd get anything they could get a hold of and throw in that bag, and then they'd take off. And they'd go like a bunch of scared rabbits, and I couldn't get close to them. And I finally worked my way up to those kids, and finally I got the mess sergeant to let him go through the chow line after the guys had gone through. But they were my friends, and they would wait for me to come one way or the other. They'd lay there and wait for me, and then they always say, "What's Sie haben?" and "What do you have?" and I'd always have something for them. And when I left, they'd ask me about my family. I said, "Yeah, I got a family," and I always had the picture with them. And I said to the wife the other day, I said, where is that one picture? And it was a picture of the wife, and I had 3 children at that time. And I said, that slept with me good nights in the foxholes, you know. And I carried it in a 30 caliber ammunition box, a new one that I had, and that sealed up, and that was watertight, and I kept my letters, my writing stuff in there. And but when I left this little town, they wanted my address, so I gave my address, and I was hoping that I'd get a letter, you know. And finally one day I got a letter from a little girl named Inga Walters, and she asked me about what was going on in that, and I corresponded with her for 2-3 years there, until she said they had to move over into the Russian sector of Germany, over in East Germany. And I never heard from her after that. I never knew what happened. And those kids were about the same age as my kids, see? So we had something in common. And it was fun to come up in the motor pool and see these little kids come running. I enjoyed it.
The German people that you got a chance to talk to, did they indicate in any way happiness that the Americans had liberated them, so to speak, or I mean, obviously they were friendly towards you, so they weren't mad at you because you've taken them, you know, they're no longer a Nazi occupation or anything.
No, I tell you what, this one lady, and she made a remark one time. We talking about that, about the German army, and she said, Roosevelt tell you to fight, you fight. Hitler tell us to fight, we fight. And that's the way she kind of left it. But you did what you had to do, and that's the way she felt about it. But I got bawled out because I didn't sleep at her place one night. I was in another town, and I went back to this little town, and for a reason, but so I just stayed in the motor pool. I run my bedroll out in the back the truck and slept there, and in the morning I got up. Another outfit had moved into the town, so I went to chow and then went up and see this lady. and she found out that I'd slept in the motor pool. And she always would do this crossways, you know, instead of this way. She'd always go this way. And she bawled me out for not coming up there and sleeping. So the next time I was in town, my buddy was with me, and I said, well, we'll go up there. And so she put us out. That was my first experience sleeping in a feather tank. But no, I got along with those people fine.
We're going to wind this up. I know there's so much more to talk about, but you finally were discharged from the
Finally,
Army?
I started when the company, the 6th Army was deactivated in July, and then I was transferred into another outfit. And you went home according to the points you had. And I wound up with the 3rd Army Division, and then when I went to 3rd Army Division, that's where I landed in the motor pool again. And I couldn't get out of that. I finally was with the 12th Army Division, and then I went home with a combat engineer group. So I finally got home in December, I think. I started home in August, my first transfer, and it took me till December to get home.
Did your family know you were coming home?
Oh yeah, they did at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a question of when.
Right.
And
So where did you arrive back? What was home in terms of arriving back at that time?
we arrived back at. Well, we went out down to France. We shipped out of France.
And this is the ship that was a little bit different of a trip than...
Yeah. Well, it was a smaller ship, but I thought it was going to be a fun trip. And this where my stomach didn't agree with things going on, and I never was so sick in all my life. But I got over that. But not that we landed in harbor. What was the name? Denny, it's way down in France, and you've been there.
Marseille?
Marseille.
Okay, Marseille. Sure.
And we shipped out of there. But anyhow, it took us 12 days to get home. And we sailed out through the Straits of Gibraltar, you know, and it was a beautiful day, you know. Well, boy, we're going home, we have lights on, and this is going to be fun. And then we just got out, we hit a storm. And I don't know what caused that. It wasn't an earthquake, but boy, I tell you, those waves were up there, you know. I thought that old ship was going down. But I rode through that all right. Then after it quieted down after that, then I got seasick. And so I had a couple of days there that I didn't feel good at all, but I'll never forget that ride home. But there was one good thing about it. Out of anything bad, there's always something good. And there were so many of the guys on board that got hurt. We got through from one side to the other. And I'm surprised nobody went overboard. But they got the ship squared away, and when we come into New York Harbor, we had so many wounded or injured on there that we had priority coming in. So ships were parked out in the ocean out there quite a ways, and we come steaming right in there, you know. And so we landed back in New York.
Statue of Liberty.
Back to Old Liberty again.
That must have been a moment.
Oh, it was.
Yeah. I've talked to guys that have come in through San Francisco Harbor or
Yeah.
New York, and it's just that landmark
Oh,
of
yeah.
America. You're back home.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So I know this is going to be a tough one, but describe the homecoming.
Well, of course, they said that you got to have your full allotment of clothes before you can be discharged. So they said, well, we're gonna work you late at night to try and get all the paperwork done. And one went into the supply house one night and throwed our paper down there, and we don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have that. And I don't know, you know, at that point, why we didn't jump over the counter and just get it. I really don't know. But I come home with less than what I was supposed to have. I wore some of the same clothes I wore in combat when I come home. And we finally got on a train, and was discharged down in Camp Atterbury, Indiana. He got on a train and headed back to Grand Rapids, and of course we had a pretty good group of people there because they knew he's coming, and
Wife and kids?
yeah, wife and kids, but my boy didn't know me. He was 18 months old when I left, and
But still,
it's just a
it
funny,
took some time, I'm sure.
funny feeling.
Yeah.
You know, I had to bribe him a little bit. He couldn't figure out who it was, I guess. The girls knew me.
Your parents?
My mother was there. I never really had a dad. My dad left us, my mother and us 4 boys, when I was about 3 years old, 3, 4 years old. So he walked out of our life. So my mother brought us up, and she was a good mother.
Yeah. She must have been real happy to see you.
Yeah, and we had my brother that was in the Air Corps. He didn't make it home. He was a B-2 in a B-2 bomber, and the unit had taken off for a mission, and the weather was bad, and then they recalled it. So coming back in with a full load of bombs and fuel, they crashed, and so he was killed, and so he didn't get home till a couple of years later. His body came home.
Let's wind this up with a question I always ask veterans for the last question. How do you think your military experience, I don't mean the combat and all that, but I mean just the whole experience itself, shaped the person that you are today?
Well, I've often said it's an experience that I wouldn't take $1 million for, but I wouldn't take $2 million to do it again, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I think it gives a person a little more perspective of what life is like and what evils are in the world when you see what goes on. And I like to think it probably made me a little better.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
I know you'd never say it about yourself, but you're a remarkable man. I'm very, very honored that I have the opportunity to talk to you.
I appreciate that.
Plus, you're a car mechanic like my dad.
Well, things in common, that always helps,
Yeah.
doesn't it? You know, I was so grateful that I never went through the military school.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll tell you why. When I got finally to my assignment and they introduced me to the motor sergeant, I found the motor sergeant was an old Ford guy from Highland, Illinois. And we got along just like that. We never had a problem.
Wow.
Now, we had 2, 3 guys that was there when I came, and they'd gone through the school. And so I used to get reported every time I did something that wasn't by the numbers. And old Doc, we always called him Doc, and he'd say, I understand you had a problem today, Doren. Well, I didn't have a problem. I fixed it, but somebody else had a problem because I didn't do it by the numbers. And those guys used to get on me about that, you know.
Gosh, that's so funny.
But when something didn't work, and I'd worked at that thing long enough, I knew what I take a shortcut. I do this and that, and I know that problem is over here.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And I'd have it going again.
Wow.
And Doc says, just keep 'em going. Just keep 'em going. But we got along just fine.